Good day everyone. What we have here is an N70 Toyota Hilux, also known as a KUN26R Toyota Hilux. They built them between 2005 and 2015, later replaced with the N80 Hilux. This one here has done a lot of kilometers, and I've done lots of repairs and maintenance in the few years that I've owned them. They're generally regarded as being unbreakable, and I believe that is true with the right maintenance. So today we're going to have a look at what we need to do to repair and maintain a car like this, and what to look out for if we're buying a used one. So if you're looking at buying a used Toyota Hilux, let's get started. During the 10-year production model of the N70 Hilux, Toyota produced a heap of different variants. We had a two-wheel drive model, single cab, we had dual cab like this one here, we had style side trays and cab chassis, and we also had a space cab, which gave us a two-door cabin with a little bit extra space with a small folding bench seat on the back, mostly for keeping your esky. This one is the four-wheel drive model. They also produced a two-wheel drive model. They produced a Workmate, which was the base model, the SR, which is this one, and the SR5 as well, which came with all the bells and whistles, including climate control and sat-nav and ABS and vehicle stability control in the later models as well. In 2011, Toyota updated the N70 Hilux. It is the same car underneath, the same separate ladder chassis with the independent front suspension, but they updated the look of the front end. They updated the intercooler scoop, which was a little bit bigger. We got bigger front brakes, we got different taillights, and a few extra safety trimmings as well. But most importantly, it came with the 5-speed automatic out of the Prado, which was a big upgrade on the 4-speed that we have in this one here. We do have a couple of issues with the fuel gauge on the facelifted N70. They had some solder issues from factory, and they can be a little bit inaccurate. It's something to look out for if you're buying a used one. Make sure the fuel gauge is functioning properly. A lot of these Hiluxes, particularly Western Australian Hiluxes, may have been a one-owner vehicle for most of their lives. Unfortunately, that one owner may have been a multinational mining company. This particular one was owned by a mine site, but it is a dual cab, so that gives me a little bit of faith that it wasn't used on site as a work vehicle, getting sprayed down with salty water or anything like that for all of its life. The single cab chassis ones, we have to look out for chassis rust, red dirt absolutely everywhere. And of course, a good indicator it was a mining vehicle is if it has a roll bar, much like this. All the mining vehicles have ROPS and FOPS, and this is part of that mine site compliance. Have a look under any door seals, have a look behind tail lights or headlights, in the dash, down the vents. If you see a lot of red dirt, it's an indicator it probably was a mining vehicle. Have a look around the windshield for rust if you think it's a mining vehicle, because that is where they tend to rust first. Check out the chassis for any rust. I'm not saying a mining vehicle is not a good idea, but for the most part, try and avoid the mining vehicle if you can, or make sure you pay a lot less money for one, because they tend to be thrashed and they tend to be washed down with salt water, and they'll bleed red dirt until the day they die. Toyota fitted a range of different engines to the Toyota Hilux. The 2.7 VVTi 4-cylinder we find in the two-wheel drive Hiluxes, the 4-litre V6 and the supercharged 4-litre V6 petrol engine we find in the Hilux, and this one here, which is the 1KD FTV 3-litre diesel engine. It's turbocharged, it's got a top-mount intercooler, and it's common rail as well. It produces pretty good power for a 4-cylinder diesel engine, and for me, I think it is the pick of the bunch, and they do tend to fetch a little bit more money with this engine. It's coupled together with the 4-speed auto or the 5-speed auto if you have the facelift model. And of course, all of these engines came with the option of a 5-speed manual as well. Although these engines are very reliable, this one's done almost 500,000 kilometers, these common rail fuel injectors can be a bit of a problem. This is on its third set of injectors, and they do last around about 150 to 200,000 Ks, depending on how they looked after. Changing the fuel filter regularly and make sure we use a good quality fuel filter and keep any contamination out of the fuel system is your best bet for maintaining these injectors as long as you can. If you're buying a used one and it hasn't had a set of injectors and it does sound a little bit rattly when it's cold, you may be up for a set of fuel injectors, and that'll cost you anywhere between $2,500 up to $5,000 to take it into a shop and get all 4 genuine Denso injectors changed and drive out. It usually takes about a day. Something to look out for: if it hasn't had injectors, start it up when it's really cold. If it's a little bit rattly and you drive it up the road and you hear a bit of a rattle, you may be up for a set of injectors, especially if it's done 200,000 Ks or more since its last set. It also has a rubber timing belt, which is due every 150,000 kilometers. If it's coming up due, it's not an expensive job, maybe up to $500, a little bit less if you do it yourself, but just make sure that's been done and it's not due. All of these N70 Hiluxes were fitted with an independent coil sprung front end, and for the most part it's pretty reliable. It's also quite comfortable and fairly capable off-road too. Issues do tend to arise when we lift the vehicle 2 inches or more, and we tend to find we have issues with CV angles. We'll tend to eat CV boots. We also find we'll need to do a diff drop, especially if we go 2 inches or more, just to get them CV angles correct so we're not damaging them CVs as we operate the vehicle. We also tend to find we may damage front struts if we lift them with a spacer and we don't increase the bump stops. What tends to happen if we space up the front struts, the bump stop becomes the strut. The strut will bottom out before the bump stops are reached, and it'll actually bend the bottom half of the strut. We've seen many people break or bend the bottom section of the strut, which is the weakest part of the strut, usually when you least expect it, on a corrugated road or off-road somewhere where you don't have access to help. It also can happen if we flog out that bottom bush, and the strut will bottom out on the bottom of the lower control arm, and it'll also bend the strut. So we've got to make sure the bushings are good in the bottom of our struts. We've got to make sure the strut itself isn't the bump stop for the vehicle. If we lift it, we need to buy a 2-inch or 3-inch lifted front strut rather than spacing up the stock struts, because we'll tend to find they will bend as soon as we go off-road. Of course, there's all sorts of aftermarket options for the front struts. Just make sure that if you buy a big, chunky, off-road, heavy-duty front strut, that it doesn't rub on the sway bar. A lot of them, these ones don't, but a lot of them do rub on the front sway bar, and we have to actually space the sway bar down a little bit or remove it entirely, depending on what you want to do, in order to stop that sway bar rubbing on the strut. And when it comes to the interior of the N70 Hilux, Toyota were definitely trying to build a much more luxurious off-roader that the Australian market, at least, was demanding. We wanted a much more luxurious interior with more legroom or more headroom, which we got. We want more room in the back for the kids or adults if we want to. And we still want the ability to have a tray on the back with leaf springs so we could carry load and tow if we need to. It's a commercial vehicle that feels a little bit more like the Land Cruiser Prado of the time, and I think that's what Toyota were going for. We have automatic transmission, electric windows on all models, SRS airbags on all models, and we have cruise control and all sorts of nice touches that feels a little bit like I'm driving the Prado, but I'm not. On the SR5 model, we had climate control, we had steering wheel controls, and all of them mod cons that in 2005 would have seemed pretty luxurious, especially for a commercial vehicle. So inside here, plenty comfortable, I've got plenty of headroom, and I'm happy to do a long trip in this interior. It is quite the update from the previous model. Okay, very importantly, what can go wrong, or at least in my experience, what has gone wrong? Now, there's a few maintenance items that I've needed to do in this vehicle, a few things I've needed to fix along the way. It has very high kilometers, and I've had it for a few years, but here's a few things that I have needed to do. I've done the timing belt and the water pump. Of course, that's just a maintenance item. I've done a set of injectors, once again, fairly maintenance item given the kilometers on the vehicle. I've done a suction control valve on the high pressure fuel pump. I've also done a carbon clean out and added a catch can as a bit of a mod just to keep things clean and tidy in the intake. I've done CV boots quite a few times. Given that it's got a 2-inch lift, the CV boots don't last forever. I've also resealed the power steering rack. Fairly common, there's a lot of aftermarket options to replace the whole rack, but I've resealed this one. Not a hard job, but it does take quite a bit of time. I've had cracks in the rocker cover that were leaking quite a bit. Now that's quite common with these and the Prado as well. They have a plastic rocker cover and they do crack over time from vibration and heat cycling, and I have replaced it with an aftermarket aluminium one. I've done oil change and filters on both the transmission and the engine. That's pretty common. I've done uni joints, pretty common once again. Keep them greased up. They should last a long time, but not forever. I've done front wheel bearings and all the bushings in the front end. Same thing, it's an old car. It's done a lot of miles on hard roads, and that is a maintenance item that is required. I've done rear wheel bearings a couple of times. Try and buy genuine ones, but they are a sealed bearing and they do need doing from time to time. And I've also done rear suspension bushings. Once again, it does wear. You do need to change them from time to time. Make sure you keep them greased and they should last a very long time. Other than them sort of things, I haven't done anything too major. I've never needed to fix it on the side of the road. It's all maintenance items just to keep it going as reliably as possible. It's never broken down on the side of the road, and I'm very happy with how it's performed, especially given the fact that it's very close to 500,000 kilometers of pretty hard driving. It's worth noting that these 4-speed transmissions in this particular Hilux do have a maximum towing capacity of 2,250 kilograms. They also don't have a dedicated oil cooler. They do have a cooler that goes through the bottom of the radiator, but they don't have a dedicated oil cooler, which I intend to fit to this one if I start towing with it. So if you're looking to buy a vehicle with an automatic transmission that is going to tow something, make sure you're not towing more than 2,250 kilos. And if you are towing something that's rather heavy, do fit an aftermarket oil cooler. I definitely think it's a worthy investment. Keep that transmission cool and extend the life of it as much as possible. Now, when it comes to parts and accessories for the Toyota Hilux, especially the N70, there is heaps and heaps of new parts still available. There's also quite a lot of used parts still out there. The car's are minimum 10 years old now, and there's heaps of used parts and accessories that you can save quite a bit of money buying on the used market. Even more so, if you buy a used vehicle and it's already got accessories attached to it, like this one did, you can save yourself quite a bit of money if you intend to modify the vehicle and it already comes with a bull bar or a snorkel or a long-range tank or a tow bar like this one did. It also came with a 2-inch lift already fitted, and you can save quite a bit of money on accessories that you're going to buy anyway. I did add a few things to this one. I've added the flares and the canopy, all from the used market. They're easy to find, and there's plenty out there for this car, which was very, very popular when it first came out. Now, when it comes to pricing a used Hilux, it is a very difficult task, given they were built over a 10-year period. They were built in Workmate, SR, SR5, there's dual cabs, there's style sides, there's accessories, and how many kilometers the vehicle's done. Also, the different engine varieties as well. The diesels tend to fetch a higher price than the petrols, but it varies entirely based on condition, kilometers, and the specs of the vehicle. Unfortunately, I can't just give you a price now to say what it's worth and what it's not, but have a look, make sure you check out the car entirely, make sure it's not an ex-minor if that's not what you're after. Have a look at any aftermarket accessories, any wear and tear in the vehicle, and use that to judge whether what the asking price is fair or not. Other than that, thank you very much for watching.